Hey everyone, it's Vanessa. You're listening to Verified, a podcast that centers conversations around equity and inclusion. Today we have a very special guest, Keosha. Do you mind just introducing yourself for the listeners?
Yeah, for sure. My name is Keosha Love. I'm a multi-disciplinary artist, activist, and educator. I do a lot of work within the state of Toronto, and I focus on, arts, education, and community to empower BIPOC communities and women.
I love that. So a lot of times artists kind of refrain from that, or they don't really not to say they don't value their work, but the word artist comes with so much. It's a very strong label, and it could mean anything. So what type of art do you do?
For the longest time, I've done poetry. I've always written my entire life. And then I started doing short stories and film writing and directing. So I dabble in a little bit. But I think the art form that I'm the most passionate about is definitely writing.
Nice. Yeah. And how did you get into that? Like, how did you know you were a good writer and, like, start bringing that to the community instead of just keeping it for yourself?
I think I was just always the person who had a lot to say and just didn't know how to find the space or the outlet to express myself. And writing was my outlet. It was my truth. It was my way of, like, telling a story. And I love to tell stories and share my story and share the things that I've experienced. So writing does that in fabulous ways. And I'm going to quote Toni Morrison. It was her birthday yesterday. And I posted something that she was interviewed, and she talked about how powerful it was to have a story and manipulate it, take your experiences and to tell it in this way. And writing, it was kind of like a way of thinking, a way of feeling, and a way of life. So that, I feel like, is true to me as well, and writing has always been my outlet.
That's very interesting to talk about the conversation behind manipulating stories. So you also, as well as being an artist, you define yourself as a storyteller. When you're telling your own truth, do you bend it in a way and manipulate it in a way that you're still speaking your truth, but that you can share it with people so they can identify 100%. With it?
100%. I think we all manipulate our stories and our truth, not in necessarily the negative way, but in the way that either makes it more powerful or dramatic, or maybe focuses on a certain character without, telling us who the character is. I think we all try to tell a story from our lens, and whenever it's from our lens, there's always bias, no matter what. So I think everyone's story is manipulated in that sense because it's from our perspective, and what we see is not what others see. Exactly. So in that way, I think it's powerful, but can also be a manipulation.
Has there ever been a time when your story, like, it's like a beautiful experience that has happened to you and you've shared it and people are like, I don't really like the way you told that story, or like you get critiques on something that you were so passionate about?
I've never had that direct experience in terms of, like, my words and what I'm trying to say. But in another sense, in high school, I wrote a memoir about my mom and I got a really great mark on it. So I'm like, yeah, let me tell my mom. And she also saw the manipulation. And not that she didn't agree, she didn't see things the way I saw. So I told my story, and she's a part of that story. So maybe that was a critique. She was saying, like, oh, that happened? How? I don't remember this, or whatever. You felt that way. Because, again, like, it's my lens. It's my story. So for her, it was just like, whoa, never realized you felt that way. Or I didn't even think that actually happened. So I guess in that way, it was kind of a critique, and also someone who didn't relate completely to my story.
Did that open it up so that you and your mom have a more trusting relationship where you can talk to her about your lens now?
I think that's an ongoing process. Okay. We are currently on that ride where I try to open her eyes to certain things and help her unlearn. And that could be really hard in a mother-daughter dynamic just because it's your mother, and mothers are the ones who are traditionally supposed to teach. But I think we all have a lot to teach each other and exchange, and she's still trying to unlearn that because sometimes it could be seen threatening or as me kind of belittling her as a mother, and I don't ever want to do that. So I think we're constantly trying to help each other understand and break those generational barriers right now.
That's a beautiful way to put it, is you're both understanding, you're both unlearning and having to relearn, because it is a generational gap of what you're learning and how you're experiencing it. You also went to Ryerson, and I want to dive into that, but what you're taught here could also be so different from what your mom was like taught and how she learned when she was younger. So it's good that you're actually working through that. And for like the listeners who might not have that relationship with their moms, how would you suggest that they open that conversation up?
I'm going to speak for Caribbean mothers because I feel like I could resonate the most. I don't know how other non-Caribbean parents' dynamic may look like. So for those with Caribbean or just Black parents, I feel like the first thing that you got to do is put down your ego. Because when you come in trying to tell your parents what is wrong or right, that's already like a red flag. And that's why their ears aren't open or ready to receive what you have to say. And that's something I did in my teenage life. I tried really hard to open up to my mom because I'm naturally a vulnerable person. I was never taught vulnerability at home. It's something I just realized I was. My mom, she didn't get it. You know, she didn't understand it because she never really had the spaces to be vulnerable with her mother. That's a whole other story. So when I would try to talk to her and reach to her as a teenager, it was a lot of like, you don't know anything. I'm better than you. And I understand why she did not receive that well. I'm learning and I'm apologizing and trying to reach her in different ways. So that's more of like less ego and more like, hey, I think this will be a benefit for both of us, not just me. Because if you come into this dynamic with, I'm just trying to benefit my own ego, that's why the guards are up.
Yeah.
Right? So I think to mothers and daughters, I think if you just come into a space where there's no ego and no trying to one-up the person, then there could be a mutual understanding and a better dialogue, hopefully.
Do you run her by the stories that you may incorporate her in now before you show them to anybody? Or if you're doing a poetry in front of people, do you be like, hey, Mom, I wrote this piece, just want your feedback before I...
It's funny you bring that up because not necessarily. Like, she's seen me read some of my poems before. We've never really talked about it, and because they're not really specifically about her. But there is something that I am working on, and a friend asked me if I was gonna like bring it to her, and I was kind of debating if I should or not. That's interesting you asked that because I'm currently writing a piece about the mother-daughter dynamic and like building healthy relationships in Black families, and how we could start the conversation in a good way and not in a like dysfunctional way. Because sometimes conversations end up being misunderstandings and a lot of yellings and a lot of conflict. So trying to find a way to meet your parents the way they are. And yeah, I'm trying to work on that piece right now. It's not a poetry piece, it's something for my blog. So it'll be more like a storytelling. And yeah, I think I would like to show her, but it's also scary at the same time because we're still working at that.
I like the part that you're talking about, like putting your ego aside. I feel like we hear it a lot though, and sometimes for me, like I'm a Leo, it's that pride.
I'm a Leo rising.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I love horoscopes. We'll not get into it too much, but we could talk after. But your ego is a very complicated thing, and sometimes when you're acting, you don't realize that your pride is blocking it. So when you put your pride aside, like what's that process for you to be like, you know what, I need to come to my mom, and if I want to create and foster a relationship where I can sit down, grow, because there's so much trauma. Like I'm even going through it with my mom. Like there's a point in time where I have a younger sister, and I started like trying to tell my mom about how to be a good parent, and I've never parented a child. But then I was like, you know what? Like I had to sit down and have a conversation with her, and I learned that she went through so much trauma, and it came to a point I was like, whoa, I actually respect you a lot for going through that, and now I understand you a bit, but it was putting that ego aside. But for me, I know how to do that. If you could give advice to people to be like, that's your ego, put that in, like, check that. Like, how do you recognize that for people who might not know when their ego is coming out?
Good question. I think the best way to check yourself is to ask yourself two things, you know, what am I trying to accomplish and what are my intentions? When you revisit your intentions, you're able to identify what you need in that moment. And for me, I had to decide, am I trying to be someone who knows it all, or am I really trying to get close to my mom, right? And a lot of the times it was like, I just want to show my mom that I know better. And now at this age, I'm like, I just want to get close to my mom. I just want to show her that we can be close and that we can, you know, break those barriers and that we can go through this healing journey together. She doesn't have to do it alone, because a lot of mothers, Black mothers specifically, they think they have to do it all alone. Right? And it goes back to, you know, trying to be superheroes and superwoman and trying to prove people that we have it all together. But the truth is we don't. And that's important to acknowledge. And I'm trying to help my mom understand that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to have friends. It's okay to lean on your daughter because I want to lean on you. Right? So I'm trying to have those conversations now, and not just with my mom, but with my sisters. So I'm the oldest of 5.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I'm the second of 5.
Yeah. So I relate to you completely. And that's things that I'm also trying to unlearn. I'm not trying to tell her I could take her job or her place. I'm trying to show her there's better ways to speak to your children. or to handle them, because we're all so different, and what worked for me might not work for my younger siblings.
Exactly. That I love that.
Yeah.
Just when you understand how to deal with certain people, but it is like, it's your mom, she knows you, and it's understanding like where she's coming from and teaching. But beyond just teaching and having these conversations with your sisters and your mom, I don't know if do you have any brothers?
I have one brother. Okay. So my mom had twins, and one's a boy. So he's the only boy in the family. That's a very interesting dynamic right now, because he's like 8 and thinks he's a man, and he sees all the girls around. It's like, I'm the man here, and like it's
that's not it.
Not it, but I understand.
So besides just educating them, you also use your art as a form to educate others about wellness. What's the importance of doing that, and how did you come to doing that with your art?
I think one way that I kind of started to realize that wellness needs to be a daily practice was realizing that there's no conversation around how we take care of ourselves, right? It's kind of like, you know what I came across the other day? There was this question, and it was like, why is my strength determined by how much pain I can endure? Powerful question.
That's good, yeah.
Why is my strength measured by how much pain I can endure? And I realized that a lot of us women are being praised for all the weights we have on our back. We're being praised for how much we could carry. We're being praised for how much we can like pretend everything's okay. And I feel like that is so backwards. And I started to unlearn that, because I would be the same person. I'm like, I'm a fighter. I'm a soldier. Bro, I need rest.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So once I kind of came to that space, I'm like, yeah, no, this is not how I want to live the rest of my life. I don't need to be the strong, Black, independent girl, snaps fingers every day, you know? And that's something that I had to reclaim for myself and rewrite my own narrative, because people will write the narrative for you and for Black women and tell you how you're supposed to act. And that's something I wasn't about, and wanted to change for myself and for my family. But those conversations are hard. And I think the best way to navigate those conversations was making sure we're okay first. And that's where wellness comes. Because if we're not okay, we can't contain these conversations. They're too much for us, right? So healing is how I came to that. Okay. And understanding that healing wasn't just about going to a hospital and getting stitches or getting Band-Aid. It was like inner work too. And like pulling up emotions that you thought you didn't have, but you really still did. And there's a lot of things in the past that are still following us and that we still project onto others. And how can we deal with that? How can we get through that? So I started doing a lot of healing work for the past 2 years. This is still new to me. I'm not an expert. But what this wellness journey for me looked like was unpacking. It doesn't have to be online all the time. I think online is a great platform, but some of this process is offline too. So you could choose, like if you want to go online and share your truth, by all means, that's amazing, but it's not the only way to heal. A lot of that looks like offline, finding professional help or leaning on someone else who could give you that help, because we all know that therapy isn't as accessible for folks. So there's many ways, and I think it has to be tailored towards you. So some of the things that I love to do is yoga. You know, I love to write, but I also understand that even writing is hard work. You know, sometimes writing takes up too much emotion, so I'm like, I don't want to write today. So sometimes I'll roller skate. I love scooters. That's kind of like my self-care. When I'm like really upset, I roller skate. I talk to somebody. I really like to talk. I don't know if you noticed. And because when I'm talking, I don't even need you to give me advice. It just helps me get clarity. Because a lot of things we're keeping in our head, and it just doesn't make sense. And again, I'm going to quote Toni Morrison, because she said in this interview, she's like, everything that was disorganized in my head, when I put it onto paper, it was like all clear, right? It's the same thing with talking. You're like saying A, B, C, D, and then when you spit it out, you're like, oh, it was really B. You know what I mean? So talking was my tool of like wellness and like taking care of myself. But I know that doesn't look the same for everybody. So using my art to kind of show others, these are some options, you know, these are some resources. And then I started doing these workshops and events that kind of talked about not just art, but like the importance of wellness, and how sometimes we do art for the wellness and we don't even identify that. So for a long time I was writing to write. And then when I got to high school, I'm like, oh, I actually do this because it makes me feel good, because it's my way of escape. It's my way of like repairing old wounds, right? So for the folks who cannot afford crystals, can't afford, you know, yoga, can't afford therapy, which are all great methods, and I use all 3 of those. But again, it's inaccessible. Art is that one thing that we could always draw back to, and I find it's such a powerful tool for folks to heal, to unpack, to express themselves. So I feel like intersecting the two is like a no-brainer. And we're already doing it. It's not something new. It's not something I just made up. We've always done it. You know, our people have been storytelling for years, you know, for decades, for centuries. And we have to go back to it and like why we did that. Why are these stories so important? And I hope that I could continue to tell these stories, not only for myself, but, you know, other people of color, and rewrite the narrative. And yeah.
There's something in that I just took. I'm sitting here like, wow, like, thanks for this advice. But skateboarding, rollerblading, that is so unconventional. And I think that needs to be taught more. It's just like what you take a break from.
Right.
And it just, you don't think about it. Like mental health, like I use art therapy because that's a method of therapy. But it's like, no. What can you just relax your mind with?
Right.
Take a break from what feels good to you. And I think those are conversations that actually need to be had more.
Yes.
So first of all, thank you for sharing that.
No problem.
But I do want to dive into the pretending aspect. A lot of times in the Black community, I'm going to speak from a lens that I cannot like identify with, is we don't talk. I was raised by a Caribbean father, and it was like, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry for. You don't be vulnerable. So it is that you have to be strong, and you know you're strong by what you carry on your back and the scars that you have. Like, are you a fighter or are you a soldier? But those are conversations, and we know like that people in the Black community need to talk more. And there's so many other immigrant communities who need to talk more. Even I would say like there's other heritages and like Canadian culture itself that need to talk more, but it's sheltered. So we know that talking is a problem and that we need to get people to talk. But how do you do that?
Good question. I think the best way, and I've told actually two of my friends this, because they see how I am. And I always try to say it's not a contest. It's not about who can talk the most, who could spill the most. And sometimes social media can do that. It's like, okay, should I share this because this person is sharing?
Yeah.
You could choose whatever you want. But I think something that's been helpful to start the conversation was to listen first. So for those who are on social media, you could find any community, whatever you like. If you like plants, there's a community. If you like eyeshadow, there's a community. You know, if you're queer, there's a community. If you're Black, there's a huge community, right? So I think if you start to listen first and see how much you are not alone, that will help you start the conversation. Because a lot of why we don't talk is the stigma. We think our experience is so wildly different, and it's really not, right? So like you just talked about, you know, your mom and, you know, dad relationships and like trying to break those barriers. And I'm having that same issue, and we were just meeting today, right? So I think the first part of starting the conversation is listening to what other people have to say. People who look like you, people who are, you know, in the same circumstances as you, and seeing what they have to say. And then, you know, contemplate on that a little bit. Think about that a little bit. Tell a friend what you read. Do you agree? Do you disagree? That's how you start the conversation. I think that's how it started for me. I started to read a lot. I'm a big bookworm from when I was young. And a lot of things that I read is either I really liked or I'm like, why?
Yeah.
You know? I had a lot of questions at a young age. And then this talking started because I had so many things to ask, so many things to wonder, so many things to think about. And that started the conversation for me. And I feel like it could go for anybody. It's like really reading up on something that you're interested in or going to a community to just hear those experiences and then coming back with your own thoughts after.
Yeah, that is one thing, the questions components. I feel like people who ask a lot of questions are so successful because they get the answers they want. I don't know if you can relate to this, but in a university setting, I also went to Rye, obviously. But it's in classrooms, it's like, oh, stop raising your hand, stop talking. And you're discouraged to ask questions, but so many people need to. And then it shuts you out. I watched a documentary, and it was about Ethiopians, and they were saying in Toronto, some people can't like connect to that culture because they don't know where to go, and they don't have that community. It's like, if you're silencing them, that's a huge component of their life, their heritage, that they're not getting the answers for. And it's like, you can have an identity crisis when you 100%. Don't know where you're coming from. So ask questions, get involved, don't be afraid. Even there was one white student, and she was a female, and she came up to me. It was during Black History Month last year, and she's like, there's so much I want to know, but like, can I just show up to like Black events? And I'm like, yeah, like 100%. People will actually respect you more when you show up, sit quietly, listen, and then ask questions that you want the answers to. If you come in and start telling people stories for them, that's the problem. Like,
Right.
never speak for someone else.
100%.
But with that, I want to ask you, because you identify as a storyteller, and we kind of touched on that before. How do you choose the stories that you want to tell?
Good question. That's hard. I think it's where I am in life.
Okay.
Well, that could change because sometimes I want to bring up where I used to be. But a lot of the time it's like, what's happening right now and how can I kind of convey that into a story? So the last thing I wrote was on, I think, boundaries, because I just discovered what boundaries were. And I'm like, wow, this is a game changer. You know, this is something that people need to know about, right? So sometimes it's about like what I'm experiencing in that moment, what stage. You know, growth is constantly fluctuating. Like, we're taking steps forward and then sometimes going back, and that's okay. Sometimes it's necessary to go back and revisit where we were, to be like, what worked, what didn't, right? So the stories are really based on where I'm at right now. And sometimes they do come from a place of healing too, if I do need to go back. So the story that I want to work on eventually about my family and my mom, that's definitely going to take work of going back and revisiting old emotions that might be a little bit hard. But at the end of the day are going to not only paint not a beautiful story, but a necessary story, but also do the necessary work for me to unpack and move forward, you know, in my life and hopefully start my own healthy family.
I don't think people realize that part, that when you're writing, it takes such an emotional toll. Like, I've said it before, and I'll always say it, like, writer's craft at Ryerson was the hardest class I've ever taken, because my prof was like, you need to be emotional, like, you're like a good writer, but you're not being vulnerable. And then when you have to push, like, I had to talk about things that I wasn't ready, like you're saying, to talk about. But it is a healing journey. By the end of that, like, my mom would see me like writing and be like, why are you crying? Like, you're doing your homework. And I was like, it's just so much. Like, but it was an emotional process to be like, you know what? Like, I've never confronted that. It's just a story. But like, now I'm looking into like how it's feeling. Because when you take writer's craft, you have to be like, okay, describe the emotion. Don't just say the emotion. And I was like, oh, fuck. Like, what was I feeling? So that's very interesting that it is a healing process for you, and even for like your listeners and who's taking that in. So the
resonation is so powerful. Like, I feel one of the greatest rewards about writing is that knowing people are listening and that people are feeling too. Because I think we all sometimes don't want to feel. I don't want to feel sometimes too. That's real. Like, you know, feelings suck. But at the same time, like, feelings are great too. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's nothing great about like someone just messaging you and saying like, I read that, and like, bro, same. Like, same. I'm like, same, sis. That's just the greatest feeling, because you know, like, okay, this story does matter. It already did, but that affirmation, you know, knowing somebody resonated, knowing that somebody needed that, bro, that's just amazing. But also I want to recognize as well is that like this work is hard, and that's why you don't always want to write or photography or paint, because doing what you're passionate about sometimes does evoke that emotion. And that's why we need other practices that just make us feel good, so that we could take time away from that emotion sometimes. I don't want to write every day. I don't want to cry every day. That's, you know, so finding ways that we could come back from the healing sometimes is necessary too. Like, healing 100%, I recommend everybody to think about what they need to heal from and what are they currently running away from. And then knowing that some days it's okay to not do the work. Yeah.
That's the biggest part. Yeah. It's okay to take a break. People, I'm still learning how to do that. I fight myself when I do that. I just, I get too anxious when I'm taking a break, but I need that. Like, my body, there's a thing that your body can hold more pain than your mind can. And it will take it until it just shuts down. It's like, you need to sleep. Right. Rest yourself. But to go with, I like the cis same. Like, what platforms do you share your art on?
Yeah, good question. Two of the main platforms that I use is my blog, so KeoshaLove.com. Okay. My website, I put a lot of so I have a series called Learning How to Fly. And it's basically about literally what it says, learning how to fly. Because, like, there are a lot of things that we can't pick up on our own, and then that stops us from like flying with our own wings, right? And I feel like that's something that I'm currently going through. Sometimes I don't know how to fly from a situation. So I talk about different topics that I've experienced and how I've learned how to fly from them. And then I replace the learning how to fly with whatever that topic is for each block. So the boundaries was like learning how to set boundaries. So it's all about learning and unlearning, and how I'm currently trying to, you know, aid my evolution. So I use my website for that. And then Instagram has always been, that's how it started for me, to be honest, because I have such an amazing community. I just started sharing my shit on Instagram, to be honest. Some people are probably like, girl, that's too much. And others are like, yes, more, right? So it's just like you will never win, but at the same time, it's for yourself. I always try to tell folks who are looking up to me or want to do similar things to me, it's just like, always reevaluate why you're doing something. Because sometimes we're not ready to share, but we want to share because we think that we owe that to our followers or to our audience. And we need to get rid of that. Like, I know that I want to share only when I'm ready to share and when it's benefiting myself, not for who's watching, right? So always like reevaluating your intentions is like really important. And I'm trying to do that right now on my platforms. And then my other platform, Our Women's Voices, an organization that I started in 2016 at Ryerson, actually, is also another platform that I like to share my stories, but also the stories of others. As I've done this work and I've been doing this life, I guess, being myself, I realized that there's more than just my story. There are stories of so many women who just don't have the platform to kind of talk about what they're experiencing or the things that they did experience and then overcame. There are a lot of people who go unseen, unheard. And I wanted to stop that and amplify the voices of marginalized women specifically. And that's kind of the work that I've been doing for almost 4 years now. On our platform on Instagram, we share stories of women all around the world. You could either send us a DM so we could feature you, or we'll pull from stories that we saw that inspired us. And we kind of created this community where women are kind of like giving each other empowerment, encouragement, or life hacks, hints, maybe a story that really resonated and someone else needs to hear it. We're just trying to create healthier spaces where women can thrive and that they could use their voice and build their voice. A lot of us don't know where to pull the voice from. So Our Women's Voices holds a lot of events and workshops where we kind of help in that journey because that's hard to kind of like just pull your voice out of nowhere, especially when you've been taught as a woman to be discreet, to be humble, to be modest, to be all these things. So a lot of the things that we do is focusing on rewriting that narrative and reclaiming, our voice. And that to me is powerful. And I think instead of just using my platform for my story, I want to use my platform for all of our stories so that we're all heard. And that's what kind of keeps me going every day.
That's so beautiful. Yeah. Do women donate their time for that, like who are facilitating the workshops?
Yes. Okay. So not all donate. We pay the women as well. Nice. So we've gotten funding in the past so that we're able to support other women who want to share their art or teach or just whatever, et cetera, et cetera.
Is it like by writing grants?
We've used grants before, but haven't been that successful. Okay. But a lot of it is donations. Nice. So we worked with other collaborators that have donated their money or their time or their resources. So like at the end of an event, we could provide like gift bags or goodies to our followers that kind of like related to the theme. So for example, we had an event called Mind Your Body a couple years ago, and it was basically about body positivity and, and sex and like, this culture of like sex and like the things that are going on the internet and like, are we really body posy or is it only that kind of body? So we gave everybody some body kits to go home with and like some face masks and like tools and stuff like that we got sponsored. So we try to do that. And right now this year we actually are working on 2 grants. Fingers crossed we get them. So
Good luck with that.
Yeah, thanks.
I do want to talk about 2 collaborations that you did. One was with Absolute Vodka and the other was with Nike. What was that experience like for you and what work did you do with them?
I'll talk about the Nike one first because that came first, which was mind-blowing for me in the beginning because sometimes you don't realize that you're being seen. I do this for Black women and women all over. And storytelling has just been like a natural for me. And I'll do it whether people are listening or not. So the fact that people were listening was really cool. And this really super dope girl, a beer, she discovered me. I don't even know how. And she was working on a Black History Month campaign called Until We All Win. And it was basically about Black leaders in Toronto or who lived in Toronto that are kind of making an impact and can pave the way for other youth who are trying to lead the next generation. And she reached out to me. But when she reached out to me, she did not say it was Nike. She just said something like, hey, I love what you do. This is great. I have this project. Would love you to be a part. And me just being me, oh my God, yes, like 100%. Got the email, Nike. And, that was really dope experience. And I kind of kept it quiet for a little bit because it was, when I got hired for it, it wasn't until like a month later because it was for Black History Month and I got notified in January. So I was like, so hard to contain that. And I got to be part of these 3 series, which was really cool. The first one was like a little interview of all the Black leaders. Shout out to Kwame and Chris. They were a part of it as well. It was super cool to meet them. They both do incredible work. So we all got interviewed and did like a promo shoot. And kind of talked about ourselves and what it means to make an impact and to make a change in the community. Then the second day, we had a panel at House of Hoops where all the youth of the next generation who are trying to make a change got to sit in for free and kind of hear about how we got here and how we're still trying to get somewhere. You know, we're not experts at what we do, but we're currently trying to learn and expand and enhance our lives and, you know, make space for other Black youth to also be involved and to also create change and disrupt systems. So that panel was amazing. You know, both Kwame and Chris had amazing things to say. And then the final day was the community day where everyone from the panel, including like other younger youth who were like 5, 6, 7, got to come for like this big day in Scarborough in the community center. And we all got to teach our little art forms or our passions to a group of kids. Wow. And kind of talk about how we're using our art or our passions to kind of influence change. So I used poetry. So I taught a bunch of 6, 7-year-olds. I think the oldest was 12. So 6 to 12. Poetry and writing, and I gave them some writing prompts about being Black and do they know what Black is and what's that like. That was really cool.
Were they very receptive to doing that?
They were so cute and so energetic. That the best day ever, actually, because they were just so bubbly. And I usually teach like 15 to like 23. And this group, they were just so energetic, and they did have an awareness of what being Black meant. Very surprisingly. Well, not surprisingly, but like to be so articulate with it. Like a lot of these young girls, they're like, yeah, I'm Black and I know she's Black, and they're talking about hair and all this. It was just magic. It was great. And Chris and Kwame led their own workshops as well on basketball and skills and leadership. So it was just a really great match. Abir, she curated it really, really well. And then we got like these nice boards of our faces, and that got to be hung up for the youth. Just all in all, a really great experience. So that was that last Black History Month. And then for Absolute Vodka, that was actually not by accident, but like not really meant to be the way it was supposed to be. So shout out to Absolute, the entire team, and everyone who was a part of this project. Basically, a really great friend of mine who's like an older brother, Randell. He was the star of the shoot. They kind of want to capture him and his poetry and how that's making a change. So similar work that I've kind of been doing, but he's been in this way longer than I have. Shout out to the OG. But he kind of talked about why words are powerful and how words can break systems, how words can disrupt, and how words are just everything, and how words are inclusive. They bring people together or they shut people out. So the commercial was him reciting a poem and kind of displaying leaders and change makers and people who are really making a change in Toronto. And I think he got told that they needed more people, more leaders. He just reached out to me. He's like, girl, we need you for this. I know it's last minute, but blah, 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 blah. I'm like, I'm in, but I have class. The people on set were like, it's okay. Like, you could come for this time and go to class and then come back. Oh my God, they were just so kind. I literally came to class during this entire set time. But what happened was my picture was apparently so sweet and so nice, came out well, that I got chosen to be on the billboard. Wow. So that happened. So it wasn't about me, and I try to tell everyone about that. Like, the campaign is not about me. I was a change maker in the campaign, but it was centered around Randell and these wonderful drag queens and these 2 women who are doing like economical change as well. I was just one of Randell's like leaders, but the picture just happened to be a great picture. So they asked me if that was okay. I signed the form, and then that happened, and it was really cool.
That's sick. When your light shines and people see it. So we did talk about women's voices, so I think that's dope. You touched on it without us even having to ask. So you also went to the Dominican Republic for a little bit, and there's a lot of students on campus who want to get into volunteering, and I don't think people understand how to do that. So can you just talk about your experience going to the Dominican Republic and building houses, and how did you get involved in a project like that?
So there's this thing called Impact Excursions. I got lucky because it was through a how do you explain this? Like one of those one-off jobs where you're not like doing shifts or contracts. There's this company called I Love Travel, and they kind of host trips for graduating students to get involved, to enjoy the graduation, to be with, to create memories basically. And they're always looking for leaders and university students to kind of like aid that experience and enhance it. A friend from Ryerson, actually, I'm not remember her name, I'm so sorry, but she told me about this. I applied, I got it, but I didn't even know the volunteering was so rich. But it's actually a full day trip where they like paint, cement, built like real, like hard work. Like I went for the first time and I did volunteer, but I didn't have that much of a big role. And that was really great. We went to Punta Cana, and the organization that does is Impact Excursions, where they bring all the students and kind of give us the tools to kind of create and help assist that process. And then the second year is when I actually was the volunteer lead. Also, not really by accident, but I think nothing's by accident. It's all like aligned. That was just my position that year. The year before, I was the trip leader, and then this year they put me volunteer lead and the bus captain to go to the site. So I had to do the trip twice. So usually you can only do it once, but because I was the volunteer lead, I got to do it twice. It was hot. I remember that day so clearly. It was hot, sweaty, but it was just great. And lots of the kids were there watching us do the process as well. So I found that really powerful. They got to see what was being created. And yeah, that was the journey. And then I got volunteer of the year for it. So that was cool.
That was really cool. One last question before we move on to verified. We do this thing where we ask every participant on our show. But I want to know, because you're very inspirational, and I see you. I'm sitting here and I'm inspired by you. So I know that women and just individuals are going to listen to this and be able to take a lot from it. But what inspires you?
Good question. What inspires me? I don't know, people. I don't know if that's corny, but people inspire me. I'm like a cornball like that. Like, I don't know. I like look at somebody and I just either hear something they said or I draw to the energy or something. I'm just like, bro, like, I'm gonna write about you. Or I'm gonna write about that experience. Like, you know, again, I always try to use confidentially. I never write someone's story, but like what my bio said, like a lot of my stories are about the different and diverse narratives of people of color, right? Some things are not just me. It's like what I see, whether it's in media or real life, because I'm inspired by people. And I think I wouldn't be able to be who I am if it wasn't for greats who've kind of like evoked that in me and kind of like have done incredible work. I'm like, bro, I kind of want to do that too. So like Toni Morrison, like Maya Angelou, like those are two women that I really, really aspire to be like and to just make so much change and to be so iconic. Like, it's not really the iconic part, but what they did was iconic. Not really who they were, but what they did. But who you are and what you do still go hand in hand. So I'm inspired by people, and that's kind of where I've gotten to where I am. And it's not always just like influential people who are like, you know, famous or rich. It's like the average Joe. Like, I could have a conversation with you. I'm like, bro, you're this or you're that. And I take so much away from people. And I think, again, that's where the talking comes from. But I love it. And I love people, and I love getting to know people. And I love, again, the stories. I always go back to stories. I love stories and hearing about what people did or what they went through. And it's not always sad stories or like traumatic stories. It's just like the good shit or the good lives that they've lived or the magic that happened or the coincidences. Like, I love all of it. So I think it's the stories that have brought me to where I am.
I love that. Yeah. And I love people. So that's perfect. So verified. It was created with the understanding that a lot of times people go on Instagram or Facebook and they seek those likes and that validation. So if you could redefine the meaning of verified, what would you create?
I would say self-affirming. I think 100% we all want to be validated, and it all comes from childhood. This is a normal thing, healthy thing. A lot of people get judged for it. We all want validation. But outside of the validation and the likes and, like you said, the verification, I think it's being able to self-affirm. You need to be able to establish that before you're able to receive, you know, other people's gratification. And sometimes you won't receive that gratification. So what are you going to do after that? You know, what are you going to do when people aren't telling you how great you are? Who's going to be there to tell you that? You have to be, right? So being able to affirm yourself is really powerful and important. And I encourage everyone who's watching your podcast and everyone who's out there who's kind of like stuck on comparison or stuck on Instagram or social media is like, build that self-affirmation because that's what's going to take you further. And that's what's something you're going to need to like kneel on and depend on when you have nobody telling you how great you are. You got to be that voice. So I would say self-affirming.
I love that. Can you just plug in all your social media so people can find you?
It's all the same and everything. Keosha Love, Keosha. Love with 3 E's. And my website's just Keosha Love. Regular love.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So thank you everyone for listening. Make sure that you catch our episodes every Friday. And we just have a special gift for you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Vanessa, for having me. And thank you to the entire Verify team.